Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, January 19th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 226 days. The game against Michigan in 310 days. Earlier this week, our good buddy Marc Givler of BuckeyeHuddle.com held an all-day chat on our message board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show, but one of the big topics during that chat that kept coming up because people kept asking, people wanted to know more details, was about the Ohio State coaching staff. What is the Ohio State coaching staff going to look like for 2023? Because they've announced what the offensive staff is going to look like. And they haven't said anything about the other side of the ball. So I think that's sort of raising some questions. Are there more changes coming? And what was really interesting was there was an answer that he gave about the NCAA, about something that just sort of flew under the radar, something that the NCAA didn't do about a week ago that is maybe kind of holding things up a little bit for the Ohio State coaching staff and coaching staffs around the country. So I wanted to talk about that today. Marc is my guest. And I guess, Marc, let's start with what the NCAA didn't do. As is the case with so many things around college football right now, the story is, what did the NCAA not do when they were supposed to do it? And in this case, on January 11th, they were supposed to vote on expanding college football coaching staffs, which would allow, quote, any institutional staff member to perform coaching duties on practice days. That vote was supposed to happen on January 11th. And Marc, you'll never believe it, but the NCAA didn't want to make a tough decision and make that choice. So why is that a big deal right now?
Yeah, so they all met in San Antonio, the NCAA. They have a big meeting in San Antonio every January, and this was supposed to be on the agenda for the meeting, and apparently they decided to not vote. So that's postponed. They have not given guidance on when a vote will take place. This is a little shocking, even by NCAA standards. There's not a lot of resistance to this. Like, everyone, I think, kind of thought, oh, this is obvious. First of all, it makes sense. Second of all, just about everyone's in favor of it. And third of all, it's kind of a rule that's being widely broken across the country anyway. So let's just let this all out in the open and let it be legal. And so why they didn't decide to vote on it is kind of beyond my comprehension, but they have not. So, for programs, and this isn't just an Ohio State thing, this is programs across the country, but for programs who are trying to set their coaching staff, this is important because not only are you, at this time of year, you're making a lot of support staff hires because you're losing, if you're Alabama, if you're Clemson, if you're Ohio State, a lot of your lower level guys are getting cherry picked by by smaller programs to get promotions. So you're trying to fill those positions, and you have, your pool of candidates presumably at this point, but you don't know how you're going to be able to deploy them. You don't know if they're going to be able to coach on the field in practices. You don't know exactly what the rule is going to be because they didn't vote on the change. So that's causing a lot of problems. But, it also, for places who maybe have veteran coaches who, are weighing retirement decisions, one easy way to kind of transition into that phase would have been if they can stay on the field as coaches, but kind of be taken off that 10-man coaching staff that can go out and recruit and everything else, but they could kind of stay on as analysts, help with the practices, maybe assist a little bit on game day in the box or in the booth headsets, whatever. And so now there's no clarity there. You're trying to set your coaching staff, and that's the other thing. You really have to set your main coaching staff before you bring in the analysts. It's kind of backward. If you fill out all your analyst roles, but you may have an opening at offensive or defensive coordinator, and you don't know who the coordinator of your offense or defense is going to be, or who a position coach is going to be. It's kind of hard to hire an analyst that's going to be working underneath them when you don't know who is going to be, working with them. So it causes all sorts of issues. And I think everyone just expected this was going to be voted on and passed, and this was going to be easy. But with the NCAA, it just never is.
Yeah, what a surprise. The NCAA has abdicated its responsibility to make a decision and run the sport in a way. Boy, stop me if you've heard this one before. Yeah, I think you kind of talked about it there, but I want to make sure people sort of understand when we talk about assistant coaches, there are the 10 countable assistant coaches, which for Ohio State, this year it's going to be your offensive coordinator and Brian Hartline and your offensive line coach and Justin Fry and your quarterback coach in Corey Dennis, like all the names you know. When you hear Ohio State coach names, these are the names you know. When you get past those 10, then you've got some of the assistant coaches and the GAs and the quality control guys and all that kind of stuff. So those are names like Matt Guerrieri and Coy McFarland and Miguel Patrick. Those are all guys who were in some of those lower non-countable, not in the top 10 kind of roles last year. All those guys have left. So now you're trying to fill those spots, but you can't fill those spots until you know what the answer is. And I think the most concerning thing to me, Mark, there is they postponed the vote. How long did they postpone the vote? Indefinitely. So is that going to be 3 days? Is that going to be 3 months? Is that going to be, we'll revisit that in another year? If they don't even have a timetable, that's going to make it really difficult for people to make a decision. And, I think the other piece of this is being an assistant coach at a college football level is not quite as fun as it used to be. Like there is with the NIL, with the portal, you're traveling all the time with recruiting. Just because you have a guy committed, you fight so hard, you work to have him committed, and then you got to keep fighting, and you got to keep, because you never know until the ink is dry on the National Letter of Intent. It makes so much sense to have more people to do. There is so much more work to be done by the coaches now than there was a few years ago. That when you say this is a no-brainer, I think that's a big piece of why this is a no-brainer.
Oh, no question. The time spent on extra stuff right now, for lack of a better term, for assistant coaches and head coaches alike at the college level right now is as high as it's ever been. Yeah, I mean you got NIL to deal with and kind of what's going on with that. You've got portal situations. You're constantly recruiting. Not only are you recruiting your own commits to kind of keep them in the class to prevent a late promise from another program or another collective, but you're dealing with guys on the roster and making sure everyone's kind of happy on the roster. You're not losing guys to the portal. It's a lot. And I do think if some things aren't done like this, some common sense measures like this to kind of break up some of the work that needs to be done, I do think we're going to start seeing more and more coaches bolt for the NFL at the first opportunity. There used to be a thing where it was kind of like, well, he's a college guy or he's an NFL guy. And very, very few people were kind of willing or able to do both. And I think this is going to turn more college guys into NFL guys if this continues and they're not allowed to kind of bring on these bigger staffs to kind of help with things. There was kind of on the same topic. They used to not let like the quality control coaches have any part of the recruiting communications. Now they still can't travel and visit high schools and things like that, but now they can talk to, they can have communication with recruits. They can, be part of things. And so we've seen guys like, these are not nothing positions. I think people are like, oh, they're not one of the 10. Who cares? This is where Brian Hartline got his start. This is where Keenan Bailey got his start. So these are important positions. They're essentially a bit of a farm system for your own organization where you can groom assistant coaches this way. There's a lot of importance that goes into this. Miguel Patrick, one of the guys they lost this offseason, he joined Trent Dilfer's staff at UAB. He was huge in recruiting a lot of the Georgia guys and helping them recruit. And quite frankly, it maybe is why they lost one guy, Kay and Lee there at the end. That might have been the straw that broke the camel's back there. So these are important positions. And so to be able to fill them and to be able to incentivize people like this with allowing them to have some hands-on work during practice and things like that, I think is important. And I'm just not sure why the NCAA decided not to vote on this. Everyone I've talked to in the coaching community felt this was a layup, that this was going to happen. And so now you almost have to operate as though it's not. I think you have to, unless you get something from the NCAA and some guidance in the next, by the end of January, I think you have to just pretend that it's going to be the same way it was last year. You have to kind of operate that way.
And so then the $64,000 question becomes, okay, if this doesn't change, what does that do to Ohio State's coaching staff for 2023? Because Ohio State put out a big shiny press release last week announcing that Brian Hartline was the offensive coordinator and Ryan Day had finalized his offensive coaching staff for the 2023 season. We haven't seen any sort of press release on Ohio State finalizing its defensive coaching staff, Ohio State special teams coaching staff. Like this is all, it's just sort of like floating in the ether right now. And it feels like you've kind of heard some names tossed around as like, well, maybe they might, this guy might be up for a change or something like that. But, to me, it feels like this is kind of like a coin flip and maybe a little more likely than not that there's some kind of a change in responsibilities or something on the staff going into 2023. But until this is all settled, it's kind of hard to know, is that one change? Is that two change? Is that, how does, with all of this up in the air, what is your expectation? More or less likely that there is more likely that there is a change, or more likely that there is not a change going into the 2023 season for Ohio State?
Well, I think the uncertainty here would lower the odds from where they were 2 weeks ago of there being a change or two. But I still lean to it. There will be at least one change. I think, look, I'm generally not the conspiracy guy or reading too much. I generally just kind of take things at face value for the most part, but there was no earthly reason to just make that offensive staff announcement and not include the defense. Say your entire coaching staff is set. If it's set, I mean, there's no reason to not do that. So clearly there are things still being worked out behind the scenes. And obviously there's a lot of debate about how the coaching staff is aligned and set up. They've got an extra guy on offense essentially, and plus Ryan Day as head coach as an offensive guy. Should they rebalance the staff a little bit, add another defensive assistant? That means one of the defensive coaches or a special teams coach would have to change his role, but you don't have all the information yet because you don't have an idea of, if you want to take someone and you want to move them into an analyst role, as they did with Tim Hinton a few years ago, who was the tight ends coach, and they moved him to a kind of an analyst position. You don't know what that person's capabilities are going to be yet. So that's why I just said a minute ago, like if they need to get some guidance from the NCAA on what's going on, and if they're not confident there's going to be an answer to this or a vote on this by the end of January, then I think they just need to proceed as though there is not going to be a change to the rule, and they've got to proceed accordingly at that point. But it's definitely making it difficult, I think, for a lot of, not just Ohio State, I think it's making it difficult for a lot of programs to kind of finalize their staff.
Yeah, I mean, with the NIL piece and with the transfer portal piece and with this rule kind of up in the air, it feels like nothing is quite, you're trying to nail Jell-O to the wall at this point with any of this stuff in terms of projecting who's going to be where, in terms of players, in terms of coaches, in terms of coaching staff makeup. I mean, it is a really fascinating time to be covering college football for sure, and following college football. So yeah,
there's no leadership, Tom. I mean, I'm watching here earlier today. I've got CNBC on in the background. That's my afternoon background noise, and they've got Mike Krzyzewski on, got Coach K on, and he's promoting a book or something he's doing, and he's whatever, that's irrelevant, but he really kind of went crazy on the NCAA a little bit. I mean, he went in on the NCAA, says they don't have any, there's no leadership in college athletics right now. And this is, I think what I saw in that interview with Coach K is what a lot of current active coaches would love to be saying right now, but can't for backlash or whatever. They don't want to be in the crosshairs on this stuff. But I think we saw a very honest moment from Coach K that expressed the entirety of the coaching community in college feels about the NCAA right now.
Yeah, it is. And, to your point earlier, you may see guys who were college guys maybe switch to the NFL, because the NFL, the college at this point, there almost is no off season for college football with recruiting and all of that stuff. Maybe guys get a week or two of vacation in July, but January used to be kind of the slow period, and now it's not. And boy, that is for a sport where coaches are burning the candle at both ends during the season. If the season never stops, boy, that candle gets pretty short pretty quickly. So you'll have to see how that impacts. I think when you talk about college coaches going to the NFL, everyone thinks Jim Harbaugh, Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, whoever. Boy, there are a lot of coaches a level or two below them in terms of position coaches, coordinators, all that kind of stuff. Those guys are getting it just as badly as the head coaches are, and they're not necessarily getting it with as many zeros on their paycheck. So might be a little less appealing to stick it out. So yeah, feels like something they might want to get resolved sooner or later. And NCAA, obviously, Mark Emmert departing. They have a new president now, and we'll see how long the NCAA is in charge of the sport of college football. That's a whole separate show. We should wrap this one up before we do volume 2 of this conversation. I'm going to guess we'll get to that a little later on in the week or the month or something like that. But if you would like to enjoy having these conversations with us, you can do that at BuckeyeHuddle.com, our Huddle board. Very active, very fun community. Lots of places to talk about the direct, these rules and sort of the minutia that is sort of making college football work or not work the way it is, sort of behind the scenes and stuff you might not even realize is going on. We're talking about all of it. We're breaking it all down for you, explaining what it means for Ohio State, for the rest of the sport, and much more. And talking a little bit about, quarterbacks and wide receivers and offensive lines and all the other fun stuff as well. Little basketball, little hockey, all that good stuff, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.